Welcome to the Competitive 40K podcast, brought to you by Vanguard Tactics. 40K codex analysis, list building, strategy development, game theory, mentoring. Our mission? To help you become a better player and to raise the level of the game both on and off the tabletop. Here's your host, Stephen Box.
Hey guys, and welcome back to the show. This is episode number 12, and we've got a cracking show lined up for you today. We're going to be talking all things cheating, fair play, and sportsmanship. So today, for this podcast, I've got Jack. How are you doing, Jack?
I'm good, Steve. I'm good. How are you?
Yeah, I'm doing good, thanks. And we've also got the one and only Ben Jones. How you doing, Ben?
Hi. Yeah, hi guys. I'm doing well.
Yeah, you haven't been on in a while, Ben, have you?
No. Been very busy.
You've been a very busy boy. So, yeah, I thought it'd be great to get you back on the show, just because, obviously, between, I think, both of you two, we've probably got the most amount of games under our belt, and have got some good stories to tell from this kind of aspect of sportsmanship, cheating, fair play. So we're going to dive into what each of these mean, and then I'm going to throw some scenarios at both of you two, because I want to find out what you would do in these situations. So we can hopefully have a bit of fun with this, but the intention of this, obviously, podcast is to help people understand the difference between cheating, fair play, sportsmanship, rules lawyering, rules as intended, rules as written, and also, more importantly, how you handle those situations and what you should do about it. So what are the processes that we can put in place to help players have a more enjoyable game experience and ultimately encourage people to play the game in the right way. So I think this should be quite a good show. So I'm going to start off with this first question, and I'm going to put this over to you, Jack. Might sound silly, but why are rules important?
Well, the rules are the fundamental building block of the whole game. It what makes it work and tick. It's probably why a lot of us enjoy the game, because there's so many rules, so much depth to the game, and that's what makes it a complicated and interesting game to play, especially when you're edging towards the competitive scene. It's a real test of your skills, your ability to memorize and apply rules at any given time in any different situation.
And would you say knowing rules or rules knowledge is a skill in the game?
Oh, 100%. It's the best players will know most of, a good 80 to 90% of the rules across the entirety of the game, I would suggest, to a point where they could probably recite word for word what the stratagems do from different books, because there's a lot of similarities between the codex and the abilities in the game. But yeah, having that overall awareness is a critical part to performing well.
Yeah, no, I'd agree, and I think this is going to come into some of the aspects later on which we start to talk about. So there's four main categories when we start to think about adherence. And I prefer the word adherence than I do cheating, because cheating can, I think, imply a lot of different aspects, and it can be something that can get bandied around a lot, also, in the wrong place as well, and it can leave a really bad feeling. So I like to think of the word called adherence. I think adherence is, again, it's kind of non-suggestive, but basically we've got four different categories, and each of these categories can either be impactful in the game or it can actually be unimpactful, but that doesn't matter. Both are kind of irrelevant, and often sometimes people can say, oh, but it didn't matter. Well, that doesn't really get you off the hook just because you did this one thing. So we're going to dive into these in a little bit more detail. So the first one is called intentional. So intentional obviously means you're going to do this deliberately, or you're going to do this on purpose. So you are intentionally adherent, which means you are intentionally following the rules. And this is exactly what we all should be doing all of the time in an ideal world. Okay, so intentionally adherent. Then on the other side of the spectrum, you've got intentionally, so deliberately, non-adherent. So that means you are intentionally breaking the rules. Jack and Ben, you with me so far?
Yeah,
Got
I'm
you.
with you.
Yeah.
So one side intentionally adherent, on the other intentionally non-adherent. But these next two are where the sort of lines get a little bit blurred. So in one aspect, we've got unintentionally adherent. So Jack, what do you think that means? Unintentionally adherent to the rules.
So you are unintentionally, well, you're making, it's basically a mistake, isn't it? You're accidentally doing something to break the rules that you're not aware of, which is an awareness that you're not following the rules, basically.
Yeah, but because it actually becomes adherent means that you were unintentionally following the rules how they are written.
Oh, apologies, I didn't listen to the question. I answered the next. I answered the next.
You answered the next one.
Yeah.
So you got it right though. So you're unintentionally. It could be like, it's a good example would be, it's late game and you just pick up a handful of dice because you think your Gravis captain gets that many attacks, but you haven't checked. You're not really sure, and you could also be actually thinking, I'm going to pick up an extra dice, right? Forgetting that Gravis captains get an extra attack or something, but picking up the exact amount of dice, which is actually adherent to the rules. But you could have been deliberately cheating as well, or you could have been intentionally trying to cheat, but you ended up being adherent. But you were. So this is where it gets a little bit more confusing. So then the next one is unintentionally non-adherent, which is exactly what you were explaining, Jack. You're not sure of something and you've accidentally broken the rules of the game.
Well, yeah, my answer to the question was unintentionally non-adherent.
Exactly, yeah. So I'll give you a really good example of this. A great example is I unintentionally was non-adherent to the rules of the game when I used that Ultramarines list. I could have took all the things that I wanted to take. However, in the way that I'd written my list, it was at the point in time unintentionally non-adherent. I wasn't trying to deliberately break the rules, but it happened to be so based on my interpretation of the rules. Was it impactful or non-impactful? Well, that's not really for me to say or argue. I could feel that it was non-impactful, but my opponents could feel that it was impactful. So again, it's one of those things that it's probably happened to us all the time. Jack, have you got an example of when you have unintentionally been non-adherent to the rules?
Yes. So when using Tau and Nova charging Riptides.
Okay, go on.
It's done in the movement phase, but I quite often I've forgotten that it's done in the movement phase because if it's especially in 8th edition, sometimes you didn't even need to move half your army, so the movement phase was kind of a non-existence for me. So when I get to come to shoot the Riptide, that's the point when I realise that I haven't done that in the appropriate stage. So I've unintentionally not followed the right rules and procedures there. But I'd make sure I'd inform my opponent that that's what I'm doing. That it's slightly out of sequence, but yeah, I've made that mistake more times than I care to admit.
Yeah. What about you, Jonesy? Have you got any examples where you've unintentionally been non-adherent?
Mine's very similar to yours, actually. When I played AdMech for a very short time, I actually took the Dialodus model, the little guy who gives you +1 to hit, but he's from the Blackstone Fortress, and I gave him. I spent a CP to give him an additional Warlord trait, and actually found out at the gaming table playing that he's not allowed to take one.
Yeah.
So I'd spent the CP to give him the extra Warlord trait to regain command points. So once I found out from the player that I was playing that I couldn't do it, I just took the Warlord trait back off him.
Yeah.
But at that point you've already put him, in your list incorrectly.
Yeah. Or when you were playing me, mate, in that test game, and you were using Wrath of Mars as 1 CP, but that other stratagem is 2 CP, so you were unintentionally cheating yourself in one way, and then unintentionally cheating me in another.
But that's a good example of non-impactful, because the result of those two non-adherences got you back to the correct place.
Yeah.
Yes.
I find when when I'm playing events, it's if I use my Alder, I'm pretty much spot on because I know all the rules. If you take maybe a brand new army for the first time, you can miss something simple like a warlord trait on an incorrect model.
Yep.
Because his rules aren't very clear because he's from a board game, and you just miss the fact that he's unique, but he can't actually take a warlord trait.
Yeah, or that he doesn't have a forge. He doesn't have
he doesn't have a forge to take a warlord trait.
Yeah, so he can't benefit Mars units because he doesn't have a forge to be Mars. But you have to look very, very closely at his data sheet, and it's not often you check what units do and do not have that forge or chapter brackets around them. You just assume they have them, right? So again, that's just a really good example of unintentional non-adherent. And obviously I'm jesting there about you using a stratagem incorrectly. And you're right, like that's why we always recommend playtest, so you can have those 20 games where you've unintentionally got a couple of things wrong here and there out of the system when you're in playtesting mode against somebody that is also expecting this to happen because it's a new codex for you. But when you come to a tournament, you've ironed out all those creases. And I think that's something that's really important that you actually are very aware of yourself, is before you go to an event, ask yourself, have I had the correct amount of repetitions in with this list so I can be intentionally adherent throughout this entire tournament? Because otherwise, if not, then I'm risking the fact that I could be either A, unintentionally non-adherent to the rules, or intentionally non-adherent.
Yeah, I agree. It's knowing your stuff inside out, really.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Jonesy, the question, what is cheating? What do you think that is?
I think cheating is intentionally trying to get an advantage, knowing that it's not the correct. Like, say you know your gun's 12 shots and you roll 14. That's like an intentional cheating, or you're moving extra. Things that you actually know yourself are incorrect, yet you're trying to do it anyway.
Okay, like this unit only moves 6, but I'll move it 7, and I hope my opponent doesn't notice.
That's it. Yeah, I'll just nudge it a bit further to get the other side of this wall or something. That's intentional cheating.
How is it when? Do you think that can also happen in a innocent way, where, like that example there, somebody's moved just slightly a bit extra? Because we've probably all done it, haven't we? From time to time.
It can definitely happen intentionally. I've probably done it myself in unintentionally.
But so let's say somebody has pushed it to the limit, because in a competitive format we want to push the limits of the game, but without stepping over that line of what is fair and without trying to gain an advantage, right? You want to make sure you're maximising absolutely everything you possibly can. Let's say, Jonesy, you've spotted somebody, they've moved a bit extra. What do you do? What is your next port of call then? Do you just look at it and let it slide the first time? Yeah, or do you say something? What do you do?
I probably wouldn't say anything the first. I'd look at it, and it also depends on what kind of player you're playing. Like if it's the first game of a tournament, you're playing someone and they come to tell, like, oh, it's my first event or something, and they nudge a guy a bit too far forward, but his gun's going to be in range anyway. He's not able to make a charge this turn. I'm probably just going to let it go.
Okay.
But if I'm playing like you at an event, someone who actually knows how to play, and you're moving 2 or 3 inches too far, I'm probably going to say something.
And what would you say? What would be a respectful way to bring that up in conversation?
Steve, I think you've moved that, Ravager a little bit far. Can we just keep an eye on the measurements from now on? Something like that? Nice,
because you're not deliberately saying, move it back, you've moved too far.
No,
you've said,
no.
I think you've potentially moved that a bit too far. Do you mind just double-checking everything else? Yeah?
Yeah, that's it.
Because you'll never know the true exact placement. Or if you're unsure if you want to remove that model, just put a dice where you, from your original start point, then we know. I've often used that sometimes, and I use that myself.
I use that a lot with Eldar because they're so fast. You want to see a few angles first. I usually put a dice around the base and then move the model around a bit, see where he can go.
Or what I do is I have models touching each other. So I'll know Tigerius is touching Calgar. If I move Tigerius, I can just move him back to where Calgar is, because that was his original starting place.
Correct, yeah.
So that you can use those aspects in the game, providing you're, talking, to your opponent about that. But yeah, you're right. Cheating is basically acting in a dishonest or unfair way to gain an advantage. So fair play, then, we can look into this. We obviously want to be playing fairly. Jack, what is fair play when we use that term?
I think it's a respect for the rules and equal treatment for for all players that are playing the game. It's treat people how you would like to be treated yourself.
There's a textbook answer, Jack.
I know. I wonder where I got it from. It's
No, beautiful. I love it. Yeah, it's mutual respect for the game, right? For the rules and also your opponent. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. It's coming to the game wanting to play the game right, isn't it? It's you're not there to you don't ever want to play anyone that's turning up to bend the rules to win the game, because it's not a pleasant experience. The best games I've ever had is when two good players meet at the table and they're trying to outwit each other.
Yeah. So what is then sportsmanship, and can too much sportsmanship be a bad thing?
It's somewhat related to fair play, isn't it? Sportsmanship. But I guess that's where sportsmanship, you're probably starting to introduce a bit of the competition elements of the game, that both players want to win. But every game that I play in a tournament, I want to win it. But there's a way that I'd like to win the game, and there's ways that I wouldn't like to win the game. So if I made any kind of unintentional cheating, that's just not the way that I'd like to win. Or if I I had a bad experience with my opponent, I wouldn't feel good about the win. Things like that. I'd want to win all my games while having 5 good games and having 5 great interactions with my opponent.
Yeah, and I think like this term sportsmanship, if we look at the textbook definition, it means fair and generous behaviour or treatment of others, especially in a sporting context. Now, often what can happen is people can be too sporting, I think, and actually let their opponent get away with too much unintentional, non-adherent rule breaking.
Yeah, you have to draw a line somewhere.
And that's it. You have to be fair. In that fair and generous, we have to combine that with fair play. Has to go both ways. You also have to be fair to yourself, I think, is one of those things, and I would encourage people to remember that sportsmanship, it needs to be mutual. So if you are very generous in your sportsmanship, then you would expect to receive that back from your opponent. And I think we can talk about that in a little bit more detail, but I think often some people can let their opponent get away with far too much in order to get that best sporting vote or whatever it might be, which actually they might not be aware of this, but if you are letting your opponent get away with too much at the table, what's the inevitable outcome's going to be is that your opponent's going to score a lot more points than they should be, and that then is unfair on the rest of the competition. So actually, you could be sporting towards your opponent, but in that generous, behaviour, you've actually been very unsporting to the rest of the field and the rest of the tournament, although you might not realise it. Bet you never thought about that before, have you?
I haven't gone that deep into it.
No, I think it's. I've certainly been too generous to players in the past at my own detriment. Letting them take go backs or whatever it might be, and at some points you actually do. You're right. You have to draw a line. So we're actually playing a competition here. I want to be fair. I want to be but then I also want to be sporting, not just to my opponent, but to myself.
Yeah.
We all spend a lot of effort to learn our rules and play a clean game, that perfect game when everyone's adherent, intentionally. But that's part of the skill. Knowing your rules inside out and playing that game. And at some point, you've got to let the skill come and potentially win you a game.
So like in that one game we played, Jack, at Cretans, and when I was playing the demons into your Tau, and I literally just forgot everything on my plague bearers, And you said to me, "Oh, go ahead and do it." And I was like, at that point, I said to Jack, I was like, "I'm not going to do it because that was such bad play. I actually deserved to lose the whole squad." And then he just picked all the play bearers straight up. I literally forgot all the stratagems, all the spells, everything. I don't know what I was doing that day. And I was just like, at this point, it's too much to go back because that's going to affect Jack's game. And actually, I made all the mistakes. So we just let it go. You know, I carried on as it was and took the loss there.
Yeah, took on the chin, mate.
You for it.
Yeah.
No, but it's a good example. You know, that's probably me being overgenerous. You know,
Yeah.
I think we both won a couple of games. We weren't at the bottom. We're about the mid-table. Still a good chance of having a good showing at the tournament. And that was a massive mistake by Ben in that situation. And yeah, looking back now, I was being way too generous to him because it was my turn, you know, and you realise when I came to pull the trigger.
All the go backs would have put them on like -2 to hit for a pin one. Would have made them almost impossible to kill. Where at that point you actually killed the whole squad for free, basically.
So where do you draw that line then? At what point, let's use that as an example. So let's say Jonesy's realised this in the shooting phase that he's forgot to cast Miasma of Pestilence, which gives you a -1 to hit. What happens then, Jack?
I obviously wouldn't remind him to cast it, but if he remembered in his shooting phase, I'd happily let it go. There's nothing I could do to influence that decision tree or process at that point in the turn. So yeah, that's fair enough. It's just slightly out of sequence. It has nil effect on the game. Knowing the fact that I would likely make at least one of those in the game as well, which, you know, it's kind of getting that social contract in place that, yeah, fine, Ben, you can make that out of order operation. It doesn't really affect the game generally. And I'd hope for the same in return if I was to make that similar mistake.
Yeah, I think it's one of those that there's nothing you could have done to impact it. If there would have been, I don't know, let's say you had 2 denies in your ability to cast, Jack, and you use those on other spells, and then Jonesy goes, "Oh, but I forgot to cast Miasma of Pestilence, make this unit -1 to hit," then there's a difference because you, Jack...
you ask some awkward questions here, Mr. Box.
Yeah. But these things come up, right? And it's at that point you say, unfortunately, I can't let that happen because I decided to deny these other powers because you weren't casting Miasma of Pestilence.
I think what I'd say in that situation is you can go back and cast it, but I get a chance to deny it because like take the Tower Matcher for example. That's a bad example because they can't even deny. But if it was like a Imperial Guard army with a BS4 and there's a -1 to hit power, it's obviously the one that you're going to try and deny. It's because it's such a massive influence on the game. But that's the way I would deal with that situation.
But what if they then say, no, you can't deny it?
Is it still their psychic phase?
No, it's in the shooting phase.
Right, so you can't do it then.
It's too late, isn't it? Because I think when you come to that situation, so the player casting the power is effectively made a mistake, and they're looking to rectify it. So to me, as an opponent, they need to make an offer to say, can I then do this out of sequence? And you can say yes or no. Or in this situation, you say, well, yes, I will allow it to happen, but I would have looked to deny this power. If you want to cast it, I get a chance to roll a deny for it. And I think that's a fair way of doing it.
Do you think it's fair to ask your opponent to do a go-backs? What about you? What do you think, Jonesy? Do you think it's fair to ask somebody, can I go back and do this?
I don't think it depends on the state of the game. Like the example we just said there with Jack, like that miasma in my turn would have little effect on. There's not much Jack could have done to stop it. Whereas the other side of it that we said, where when it came to Jack's shooting phase, I realised I hadn't done it. That's far too late, in my opinion, to even offer a take back because you're the next player's turn.
Yeah. Because I think sometimes it's one of those things you think, would I like my opponent to put that on me? I don't know. I've certainly been there in the past, and my opponents asked me, can I do this? And I'm thinking, I don't know if I want to say no, because I don't want to create a bad environment here.
Yeah.
But I also feel like you're asking me this, and you shouldn't be. So again, it's like, and I know some people are not happy with that challenge at the tabletop, so they just say, yeah, okay, it's fine, but really they know that that's actually going to cause them to have a bad experience. So I would say, if somebody does ask you, there's nothing wrong with saying no.
Absolutely not, and you've got to take it in the context of the game as well. I think it's like, if it's like literally just after the psychic phase and they say shooting and they count their dice out and they're like, oh, I haven't cast this power, then I would be fine with that.
Yes.
Because they've not continued in and have done things that affect the state of the game. It's like, I've played lots of Space Marine players, and when it used to be, oh, I forgot to do my chaplain rolls, and they're at the start of the battle round, and then it's their turn, I would never stop that kind of thing.
Yeah. What are your thoughts, Jack?
No, I think it's just weird picking up on your point about going back to the example in my and Ben's game. I offered him the go back, but what I was just thinking about is how that interaction and conversation changes if Ben asks for the go back. And
well, you would say no at that point. It's the next turn over.
Well, it's but it puts me in a very awkward position, doesn't it? Because it potentially creates that ill feeling, doesn't it?
I suppose if you're worried about it personally like that, I mean, I would have no problem at the table saying, well, we're actually the next battle round over.
Yeah.
You can't do it. I'm sorry, and that's just, it's part of the game.
Yeah.
I think some people will ask a lot more. They'll see what they can get away with.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting one where we're going to talk into this next aspect, which is, what does playing by intent mean versus not playing by intent? So, and I want to ask you, so Jack, do you play by intent?
Yes, yeah.
Jonesy, do you play by intent?
Yes.
Okay, is not playing by intent a bad thing, or is it? Do you know what I mean? So is that the wrong way to play the game? What do you think by not playing by an intent?
I played a player in one tournament, and we come to the table, and he's a nice chap. I get on one. I won't name him in this podcast, but we get on really well. And he come to the table and he said, "I like to play the game. Exact measurements and movements are as they are, and there's 0 takebacks." And he actually said that to me when we arrived at the table. At that point, you sort of know, maybe that sort of pre-game conversation with each other, you can almost get a grasp of people sometimes. So I knew in that game, I had to take it real slow in the movement, make sure that I'd done everything every time. Do you know what I mean? Because I knew there was no going back.
And what about you, Jack? What do you think?
No, I don't think there's a right or wrong way, and it's almost a bit of a style choice, which is suit your personality and play style. But I think what Ben just alluded to there is it's important to try and feel out or make your intentions very clear on how you like to play the game. Do you play exact millimeters measurements with no go backs, or do you play with a bit looser and a bit more freely with intention? It's something that you kind of need to clear up in that first interaction before you start throwing the models on the table.
Yeah, I agree, and I think I love what that opponent's done with you there, Jones. He said, "Look, I like to play like this." Yeah.
Yeah, like literally, we said hello, and that was the first thing.
Yeah.
So at that point, you know where you're at.
Yep, I had exactly the same with one of my favourite ever opponents that I've ever played, and I was like, "Not a problem.
It may be the same. It may be the same person, because I know we've all played him.
This person, I don't think it was this person I'm thinking of, but in fact, I don't mind naming this person. Jeff Robinson. He said to me, we played at LGT, and he said, "Look, I like to play like this. I want the game to go to 6 turns or a natural conclusion. Are you happy with that?" And I said, "Absolutely." And it was one of the most enjoyable games of 40k I've ever played, and we got on so well ever since that. So yeah, it was like I had no ill feeling towards playing exactly the way that he wanted to play. I was happy to do that, and we both thoroughly enjoyed that game. So yeah, it was a great experience. So I don't think there is a right or a wrong way, but do you feel like sometimes if somebody does want to play that way, even if you normally play by intent, they kind of get the priority, right?
Yeah, I think if they've said that that's how it's going to be, that is actually that is the actual rules of the game. So the rule of the game is you have to do it exactly. The way we'll play with a lot of, like, when you play on a lot of the higher up tables where people play it all the time, they generally know what, like, you'll put your unit on the objective and you'll say, like, within 3, you'll say that to your opponent, and you'll be like, they're not going to come across with the measure and go, oh, that's 3.1, so you can't have it.
Yeah.
Whereas if they say they're playing by exact measurements, you're going to physically make sure and get them to agree, I'm touching this, or I'm within 15 of this, so if I advance 3, I'm going to be on it. I would play it like that with someone like that, so they actually agree your moves with you.
Yeah.
So then
that's perfect,
there's no like them saying halfway through, oh, you couldn't get there. Well, I'll be like, well, actually, we actually agreed that I could move with an advance of 3 onto this. So at that point, you're stopping any arguments back at you.
Yeah. No, I completely agree. So here's a question. Rules as written versus rules as intended. And this I want to talk about the word rules lawyering. So rules lawyering is when, and we kind of had this preamble, pre-chat or pre-recording, was when somebody is trying to gain an unfair advantage based on a poorly written rule, right? So a real classic one at the moment. Jack, can you think of anything that is rules is written fine, but broken as hell and clearly not intended?
I think the big one for me, that's just popped into my head, is the ATV's interaction with the apothecary from Space Marines. That the fact that it technically at the moment can be brought back to life, which for me just doesn't feel as rules as intended. It's rules as written. Technically you can do it, but doesn't feel right to me.
Yeah. Any examples you can think of, Jonesy?
I was thinking of the one, I think it's been actually changed now, but it was a problem a few months ago, was the salamander strap that meant you could fall back and then count as remaining stationary. So still like double shoot your models, and you could get all the benefits for being stationary even after you foul back, which normally would take those benefits away from you.
Yeah, you could fall back, count as stationary, and still charge and shoot for 1 CP. Yeah, ludicrous. When most other stratagems, fall back and shoot, fall back and charge, are 2 CPs, and even then it doesn't count as stationary. That should be like
aggressors falling back, double shooting, fighting,
charge. Yeah,
just got crazy. If you're 1 CP, I mean, everyone was going to use it.
Whereas your Eldar one, Jonesy, for your Shining Spears is fall back and shoot and charge for 2 CPs.
Yeah, 2 CPs. Yeah,
but it doesn't count you as stationary. So
no.
That should have been like a 3 CP stratagem if it was going to be rules as written. And again, there was things that, these things come up in the game. And again, you need to think about that as, is that fair? Is it fair I take 380 or 9 ATVs and a chief apothecary with the old selfless healer? Is that a fair thing for me to do? How is my opponent gonna feel about that? Is that something in which I'm gonna is this a game I'm going to enjoy? Because for me, competitive means effective, efficient, and also enjoyable. And if it's not those 3 E's, then for me it's not a competitive game. So it's
bad enough on Terminators and Eradicators, and then you're putting it on 85 point view
with bikes, 8 wounds. Yeah. In this
during the course of a game, you get an extra 500 points because you bought your apothecary.
And this is the thing that a good player or a top player in the world will go, cool mate, you brought 9 ATVs, all right, no problem. Well, I'll just shoot a unit dead so you can't bring one back, and what I'll do is just outplay you on the mission so you won't score anything. Whereas, so they're actually, somebody here has decided, okay, I found this little broken thing in the rules. I'm going to take this ridiculous combo because rules is written, I can do it. They take it to a tournament, realise that they cause everybody that doesn't know how to deal with it a really bad day, but they weren't the players that they actually needed to beat, because if their skill set's already good, they should be able to beat them on the tabletop anyway, and the players that they actually run into that will beat them anyway, they are focusing so much on rules lawyering that they're not focusing on beating, or trying to be the best player they can be. Would you guys agree with that?
Yeah.
Yeah, just on the rules lawyering as well. It's there's been a few instances where there's been a few interpretations of the same wording and things like that. And I'll flip the question back to Steve: is how do you deal with those situations when you've got multiple interpretations of the same rules? Or like just rules as written versus the rules as intended? How do you deal with that at like the Vanguard Tactics Grand Series?
So if there was ever anything like that, number one, it was my job as a TO to bring that to the attention of the players. So there was a few things as a TO I thought, okay, this doesn't feel right. So for example, at the time you could cast multiple smites, right? By, I think it was either the same character or the smite didn't increase, right?
It was beginning of 90s, so the same character could cast smite.
Yeah,
Rules
so that was
written.
it. Yeah, rules are written, the same character could cast smite. I just said from the get-go, no. We're not doing that. It's clearly not as intended. We've just played 8th edition where they made a big deal about this. It's clearly not how it's intended to be. The next thing that came up was somebody from the tournament came over to me and said, they asked me a really good question. They didn't tell me what army they were playing or anything like that. They asked me a black and white question without any bias. Can a demon prince block Lookout Sir for another demon prince? They didn't say, my opponent's taken a demon prince and he wants to block line of sight. I don't think it's right. What do you think? He's just asked me the question straight. Can a demon prince block another demon prince for Lookout Sir? And I just said, no. Rules is written, you can, but rules is intended. I don't feel like that's right. So that was my ruling on it. But that player came up to me as the TO, asked me that question, and I gave him. I then, as the TO, walked back to that table. Because this is the important thing as a TO. The TO has to walk back to the table and tell both players this at the same time. What you can't do is tell one player and then he goes back. Because what then can happen is the other person could think, well, is he lying to me? And then that can create a bad atmosphere at the tabletop.
Yeah, I think any of the technical things that we had at the GT, like I had the one with the both players asking about the Black Templar stratagem, and we had all the books open ready for me, so I could make a clear call on it, because it was one of those odd interactions in the game you don't normally see.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So in terms of then talking about books, Jonesy.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on books? So you're in the moment. Your opponent's tried to do something, and you've said, "Is that right?" What are your thoughts on books?
Well, I like to have my rules for my army with me. I actually own every codex in the game. I like to buy every codex that comes out and read it from cover to cover and get an idea of what's going on in there. If I'm asking them because I don't think it's the correct way, I usually will put the clock on me and ask for their book.
Should that be on you?
Probably not, but usually I play my games with loads and loads of time anyway. So I know where it is in the book. I'll put it to me, save arguments for a couple of seconds, and show them that it's actually this.
What about you, Jack? What do you think? What's your opinion on books? Should your opponent have their books in FAQs?
Oh yeah, certainly. I think it's I'm pretty sure it was written into every single tournament pack that you are responsible to bring all your rules and appropriate FAQs. So so I think that's completely on you as a player to make sure you have all the rules to deal with questions and challenges to the things that you're doing with your list.
Do you think that they should have, GW this is, made it you get 10 points if you have a painted army and all of the books or apps required to use your army.
Yeah, like maybe that's something that tournaments could look into, to say
It makes a lot more
you
work
get
for the tournament organizer, though. They've got to go and check everyone's bags, make sure they've got all their rules.
Oh, absolutely.
I don't think it would actually work from a logistical point of view. Maybe you should get dock points if you can't provide the rules during the game, maybe.
Yeah, it's an interesting one because I've been in situations before where I've asked my opponent, can you check that? And they've just gone, I haven't got my rule book. So
I think if they can't prove it at that time, you go with your interpretation.
Okay, so that's another one, yeah. Or you could go get a TO, right? But
yeah, and I think if you've got to go get TOs, it's on their time then because they can't provide you the rules.
But this is the other problem is not everybody uses chess clocks, and there's a lot of negativity towards chess clocks, but they do solve this issue, right? Of these these things happening.
I played a game at London GT and started the second day, and the guy I played had a bad night by the sounds of it, but he didn't arrive till 40 minutes into the game. So I put my models, deployed them in the deployment zone, marked out his deployment, and then went off, sat down, and I just put a chess clock on his. And then when he arrived, I was like, well, we're 40 minutes in, and it's all on your time. You still want to play? And he was happy. He was happy with that.
Yeah, well, I think you've done something fair, yeah.
Yeah, technically, I mean, I could have just... I went and got the referee and asked what they wanted to do, and that was kind of what we come up with. Well, they said, you can just pack up now and take the win if you want. But I was like, well, if the chap arrives, I'll play the game. But turned out he was playing knights, luckily, in the end, so he didn't need much time.
Yeah, happy days.
But it would have been worse if he turned up with like 300 models and then we're trying to squeeze a game in an hour and a half. That shouldn't be on the player that's already there.
Yeah, and what are your thoughts on chess clocks, Jack? Do you think they should be in use, shouldn't be? What are your thoughts?
I've never really played with them much. I don't personally particularly like them, probably due to lack of practice, but I have been maybe cheated out of a couple of games based on slow play and not having a clock on. So it's something that I should probably practice more and get comfortable with using, because much like Ben just said there, I always get my games wrapped up in good time in 99% of games when I'm playing other players. But in those 1%, I have left the table with a bad feeling when I've felt like I've been slow played or robbed of time, basically.
I think some of those games
I am an advocate.
You have a bad turn or something and you want to just sit there and have a look at a few things, and it might take 5 or 10 minutes where you're not really doing anything. I think it doesn't frustrate your opponent if they know that it's coming out of your time.
Yeah.
Because I quite often do that sometimes, just stand there for a few minutes. If something's been killed that you wasn't expecting, you're then trying to think of a new way to do it. And I mean, if you're not on a time clock, they just think you're stood there doing nothing.
Well, exactly. They can think you are intentionally non-adherent to the rules of the game, which is you are slow playing them. When in fact you could be unintentionally doing it, but this is the problem with that differentiation between intentional and unintentional. And I think this is a really great example because you there, Jonesy, could be unintentionally non-adherent, i.e. taking up more time, but them who are looking at this thinking, well, if my opponent wins this, he cheated because he intentionally slow played, right? So straight away you're going to be labelled as a cheater, and you're thinking, well, hang on a minute, I didn't mean to do that. It's just how it was. We weren't using a chess clock. So if you're not using a chess clock, here's the other question: if you're not, and both parties have agreed not to use a clock, are you breaking the rules of the tournament? No, not rules is written. You're not, because obviously it doesn't say in the rules of the game, anywhere in the Games Workshop book, that you have to play your game in a certain amount of time. It only says you have to complete, ideally, the 5 turns. So again, that's where you start to break sportsmanship in fair play. But again, somebody will ban that word cheating at you, so you can't really do that if you've agreed at the start to not use a chess clock. I think one of those things, like you said, Jack, you might not play with a chess clock that often, but you can't blame your opponent for potentially cheating if you haven't then used a... Do you know what I mean? If you've deliberately said we won't use a clock.
No, absolutely correct. I can't remember which tournament we were at, and it might have been up in Annual Games actually. I think the TO summarised it brilliantly, saying, guys, chess clocks are available. We recommend that you use them. If you don't use them and you come to complain about being slow played, there is nothing I can do to help you with it. I go, and actually, the penny kind of dropped with me. Then go, yeah, fair play. It's because the TO's not sat at your table all game. They have no clue what's happened in the previous, hour and a half, 2 hours. And if you haven't got a clock to record the time, what's you meant to do?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there are certain things you can do, but like you said, if they're not using a clock, then there's literally nothing you can. So, and again, that's at your discretion. You need to be prepared that if your opponent does slow play, try to give them the benefit of the doubt that it was unintentional first, I would say. If you've asked them, if you've noticed it halfway through that they are playing particularly slow, again, be proactive. Hey, we've just got this much time left. Do you mind if we use a clock for the remainder of the time so we can ensure we get this finished? Or is there anything I can do to help you speed up your game? Or I've just noticed that my turn was only 10 minutes, but we are we're this much into the round. Is there any way we can speed this up or ensure that this game gets to 5 turns? Because unfortunately, in the game 40k at the moment, let's say, Jack, we get to the table and I take While We Stand We Fight, and I also take Raise Banners, and I don't know, I take I'm just thinking of another secondary that would impact this. Psychic Ritual. Okay, I get my banners up turn 1 and I do my 3 actions and I get my 15 points for Psychic Ritual, but you took Assassinate, Grind Them Down, and you also took Engage in All Fronts, but we only got to turn 3. I get all of my points because you didn't kill my characters. I get all of my points because I got While We Stand We Fight. I managed to max out all of my secondaries, but you didn't get Engage in All Fronts because you only had 2 quarters at the time of turn 3. So even if you carried on counting it out, you can't move any more models because the time's down, but you can still look at how many quarters you're in, right?
Yeah.
So that's where we need to be really, really careful of time. And again, you need to be asking yourself, am I being fair with my time here? And if you do like time to think, like Jonesy likes to sit and think, he's a real contemplator, that's why Jonesy can have a clock, put it on me, cool, I'm happy to sit and think for 20 minutes. I'm going to use up my time.
I played a game at Glasshammer where I spent 25 minutes deploying. It was you go, I go. Sorry, not you go, I go. It was whole army. But I knew I was going second to a very aggressive Necron list. And I literally spent 25 minutes of my time deploying.
Yeah.
But I was happy to do it because I knew I can play my army in the time left. But the most important part of that game, and it actually won me the game, was making sure that I couldn't get Alfred off the board.
Yeah.
Putting little weapon platforms out in front to shield my army and hiding in the Owl Ruin, but making sure the angles were covered and measuring it out. And if it's on you, your opponent's not bothered at all.
Yeah.
Whereas if that was a game with no chess clock and I was the other player, I'd think, oh my God, we're not going to get this game done. He's wasting time on purpose. Let's get going. Let's start. Yeah. But if there was a clock on them, you're just not bothered. You're instantly at ease. You're like, well, I'm going to get my half anyway, so it doesn't matter.
Yeah, absolutely. Right, we're going to take a short break and then we're going to come back and I'm going to throw some scenarios at you both, okay?
Cool.
This podcast is sponsored by Foreground Publishing, who are the leading designers and manufacturers of tabletop pre-painted terrain. Check out the VT Terrain series, which is perfect for competitive 40k games. Just unbox, build, and play. Okay, so we're back from the break, and I've got some scenarios for you both, okay?
Yep. All right. Get on.
and I'd really like your interpretation of how you would handle this at the table, okay? So you're both up against a Necron player. Now, Necron players, when they have a full detachment of the same Necrons, they can use something called codes, and they have to write down their code order pre-game. They don't have to show you, but they write down their order of the codes that they want to use. But each of these codes have an A or a B benefit, so they can do this or get that buff. Do you know what I mean? So now the thing is, these are revealed at the start of the battle round. So your Necron opponent is going second, okay? And you get to turn 2 or turn 3, and it's now your Necron player's turn, and they say, my code for the turn is this. Or they do an action and they try and do something, and they'll go, oh, but my Necron code is this. Jack, what are your thoughts? What is the problem here?
Okay, well, the problem is that because of the order of the operations there, that if the Necron player does their codes out of sequence, they are now privy to additional information than they would have had prior from when they should have done it. So they've unintentionally or intentionally gained an advantage about doing it out of sequence. If if it was turn 3, that means the player would have I'd have flagged it on turn 1 with the player. So say, right, they go to do their code in their turn. I go, oh, actually, I thought your codes were done at the beginning of battle round. You check the rules. They go, yes, that's right, beginning of battle round from turn 1. And then if they then missed it moving forward, then I think that's then onto the Necron controlling army player to take the hit on that, really.
What, in not get access to it completely? Not get access to either of them? Or are you going to let them take the worst of the two? Or are you going to get a ref? Or are you going to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 it? What are you going to do?
No, I think, unfortunately, because the way that those rules interact, I don't think I feel comfortable opponent to take the ability if they did it out of sequence, especially, the first time it happens, you may look to let it slide, but it feels in turn 1, but then the good thing about it, that it kind of naturally picks itself up from the first battle round, where it may not be too influential on the game, but later on in the game it could become very influential. Create ill feeling for both players, couldn't it? If the one that I'm thinking of is the fallback and charge one. The Necron player's got a great cunning plan that they'll receive a load of charges and they're going to pull out their code to fall back and shoot next turn, but they try and do it out of sequence. But then the opposing player's done this play to shut down the Necron army. It does create a weird interaction between the players.
I totally agree with Jack as well. I think if it's turn 3, they've probably done it right or wrong twice before that.
So if they've done it right the first 2 times and they've told you what their code is at the start of the battle round, but this turn 3 they forgot, but it's big. It's, you've tagged their entire army and now they're wanting the code of fall back and shoot. Now, for me, I would say, do you have that written down anywhere? If you have, I'm happy for you to have it, because it was clearly your intent pre-game. Yeah. However, I don't know if that was your intention, because the actions that I've risked overextending myself to charge you, because I've consolidated into units where you can freely attack me because I am trying to get this ability, this buff, this benefit, because I'm doing this maneuver, and I'm going to take the hit of potentially losing a model or here, or a model here or there, because I've consolidated into you.
I don't think you can. I think you just, at that point, they just don't get it. That's the unfortunate part of it.
So what about this then, Jonesy?
Yeah.
You forgot to declare you've got a chapter ancient, and at the start of the battle round, or in your command phase, you can pick a unit to get this command ability on it within 6. You forgot to declare which unit it was going on. Do you think your opponent should let you put a command ability on a unit? When do you think you can, and when do you think you can't?
If it's at the end of the movement phase, I think that would be fine. To say, oh well, I wanted reroll hits on my plasma inceptors or something. I think quite generally when people deploy, there's a sort of a, if you say you've got like 3 characters and then a couple of guys who are stood there with the shields like the Blade Guard, and you've got 1 shooting unit, it's kind of, I think, blatantly obvious where you're going to put the reroll hits on.
Yeah.
I think it becomes a point where it would be not, you couldn't do it, is if you'd started shooting with 1 unit, it didn't quite kill the unit you were aiming for, so then you go, oh, the next one, oh, actually, I want to reroll hits with this unit. You probably couldn't do it then.
Do you think it's fine if you said, okay, I've got this unit of Blade Guard, it's going to be my intention for the rest of the game to give them +1 to hit and reroll misses from these 2 characters?
That would be fine with me if I was playing that game.
Yeah. And I think that's something where you've really got declaring your intent just to go, look, I've got this unit of Inceptors. I'm more than likely going to be putting reroll misses on them. I'll tell you if I'm going to do it any different.
Me and Jack recently played a practice game. We both had plasma inceptors, and we basically said that before we even practiced. Chapter Master rerolls on this unit all game till it's dead.
Yeah, exactly.
And the chaplain's going to have reroll hits for everybody else, so we don't need to worry about that in combat anyway.
And I see that with the Tower Ethereal. I just tell my opponent he's going to put the 6 I Feel No Pain aura on until I tell you otherwise. Basically, are you okay with that? Yeah, no problem. So it's just a bit of admin that got out of the way then. It saves me a potential mistake later down the line.
Yeah,
and everyone's clear what's going on.
This is a nice little cheat sheet you could make yourself, right? To help you make sure you are intentionally adherent to the rules of the game, and your opponent's not going to think that you're intentionally non-adherent, because your opponent's always going to see it through their lens and you're always going to see it through your lens. So it's good just to get that out of the way. Okay, I've got another scenario for you, Jack. Okay,
let's go.
Right, your opponent has charged in to one of your units. They haven't said anything, they've just made their charge, and you have then moved your model, you know, what you think is 2.5 to 3 inches, so well within 3, of heroic intervention. Yeah?
Yeah.
And your opponent goes, they move your model back, they go, it was my intention, and you think that they've now moved your model further away than they originally were, and they've then gone, oh, it was my intention to be outside of heroic intervention range, and you're not within 3. How do you handle that situation?
So in that situation, the player who's making the charge is responsible for either being over 3 inches away or declaring an intention to be over 3 inches away. At the point where I've picked up my character to heroically intervene, it's too late for the opponent to then backtrack. I think that's just backtracking. That's them, you know, either not considering the heroic intervention or making a sloppy play, because I imagine in that situation your opponent wouldn't, if you didn't heroically intervene, it probably wouldn't change their movement or their charging, or what they were charging, or their influence and their decisions. So I think it's on the charging player to make it clear exactly what they're doing. The combat phase is very intricate, and it's very important before finalising all your final movements. Is saying, look, I'm moving these models here. Just say I'm over 3. I've just measured. I'm over 3 inches away from your character. All these models will be over 3 inches away. There's no heroic interventions on the cards. You then either agree or disagree. You adjust models accordingly, and then you carry on with the game.
Okay, but they've now moved your model back. They tell you didn't measure your 3 inches, although you blatantly know it was, you know, 2.5. You know, closer to the 2 mark than it was 3. They've moved your model back well outside of 3 inches and now claiming that you're not within 3. But you've got no proof that you were or weren't. How are you going to handle this situation? Because it's starting to escalate already.
Yeah, it becomes very difficult, doesn't it? Because there is no way of definitively checking what's true or false.
Yeah, I don't think you should be moving anybody else's model unless they ask you to.
Yeah, and I think that's where I was kind of thinking is that you shouldn't be picking up other people's models and moving them for that exact reason. Actually, to be honest,
It's like if you've got engaged the other side of the table and you go to your opponent, can you stick my Hornet in the back left corner, please? It's got plenty of move, that's fine. But you wouldn't like when your opponent's heroically intervening, pick their model up and put it back, 5 or 6 inches back the other way. That surely you wouldn't be doing that.
So how do we handle it? Because I would handle this and go, okay, I am very sure I was within 3, but what I would like to do is go and discuss this and just ask the ref how we should resolve this issue. Because I just want to come to a fair and reasonable outcome. You didn't declare your intent that you were outside of heroic intervention. For my belief, I was within 3 and clearly within 3. So if it was going to be that tight, I would have assumed you would have made your intention clear. However, because you've moved my model now, I don't know where I was or where we were originally. Do you mind if I get a ref? And if they go, oh, let's just 1, 2, 3 at 4, 5, 6 it. I think at that point you say, no, I'd still like to get a ref. And I think any TO or ref would say, look, you didn't declare your intent and also you've moved your opponent's model. I'm saying that they can heroically intervene. I'm going to give the benefit of the doubt to the player who's going to heroically intervene. Would you guys agree with that?
That's how I would ref it if I was reffing at one of your events.
Yeah, and again, just make that intention clear. Okay, so here's another question for you. Jack, you get to the end of the game and your opponents won it by a point.
Yeah.
But you feel like they haven't tracked the score correctly. You were not tracking the score. How do you resolve this issue? So you think you're out by a point somewhere, and you're trying to go through, and they're saying, "Well, I've got it down as this." How do you resolve this scoreboard issue?
Well, I think I would ask can we just double check, the simple stuff? Let's check the maths. Let's see that everything's been added up, and then maybe even go turn by turn, checking what scores are put in when, because you can reflect over a game and understand how many points you got for engaging all fronts on turn 2, turn 3, etc. To figure out what the scores should have been. But ultimately, if I hadn't kept a scoreboard myself and we couldn't agree, it's a win to my opponent.
Yeah. Would you agree with that, Jonesy?
Yeah, I'm with Jack. I always score on my own pad and paper anyway, and I like to, after every turn, after every battle round, I like to show it to the opponent.
Get agreement.
We're currently at 20 points to 19. Do you agree with everything on here? They say yes. That's done. I'm not a big fan of going back trying to remember points, during the game. I like it. No. If you write it down clearly throughout, like I know when I've seen you play, and Steve, you have your whiteboard there, and you're constantly checking with the opponent as well. If everyone's agreeing all game, then at the end, if they lose by a point, they can't
argue.
I thought I got an extra engage on turn 1. Well, it's like, well, actually, it's wrote down here, and you've actually agreed throughout the game. Well, you only think you got an extra engage because it might win you the game.
Yeah.
So.
If you don't keep the score, you are putting yourself not only at the risk of not having your argument won because you've got no evidence whatsoever, plus you can't use that to your advantage so that you can play defensively or aggressively. So I always keep the score, even if I feel comfortable that my opponent's going to do an accurate and honest job. I still do it anyway because it's going to help me win the game. Because I'm going to try and tweak it, but I know if I need to push myself, extend it, or if I can start to, just defend my models, just score a certain amount of points to win the game. So I think that's a really good top tip there. Okay, how do you feel about this, Jonesy? You've asked your opponent, do you have anything in your army? Let's say it's in the shooting phase. You just happen to ask this question in the shooting phase. Do you have anything in your army that has a -3 AP weapon? And they say, all of my weapons are AP -2. But you get to because there was something that you wanted to do that would, maybe like use a benefit to a save or something, whatever it might be.
Yeah,
you
position the sister's lady that gives you ignore -2.
Yeah, something like that.
Sort of thing, yeah.
And you get to the combat phase and your opponent goes, I'm -3. How do you deem that in your books? Is that them intentionally?
Depends how you ask the question, because if you asked, is there anything in your army that's shooting at -3, and you say no, and then I would count combat weapons as different.
Mm-hmm.
If you asked, like, I suppose at the start of the game, is any weapon in your army -3, and they say no, and then they're like, oh, actually all my Blade Guard swords are -3, then that's sort of, I wouldn't want to win like that myself. If my opponent asked me, you know, do you have anything AP3 in combat, then I would tell them. But if they asked shooting weapons, I'd say yes or no to the shooting weapons.
So this was an example that came up recently. So I was playing Joe. I'm gonna call him out here. I was playing
good old Joe.
I'm in my psychic phase, right?
Yeah.
Playing against Necrons. And I'm like, I've got Psychic Fortress in the bank, right? 5+ feel no pain. Sorry, 5+ invulnerable save on my units. So I'm currently 3+ save on my aggressors. Do I need that -3 is really important, because if he's only -2 or -1, it's not going to make a difference. It only makes a difference.
Don't need it.
Exactly when it gets to -3. So I said, do you have any weapons? Because we're in my psychic phase. Do you have any weapons that are -3? He said no, they're all -2. We get to the combat phase and all of a sudden his destroyers are -3. So this is number one. I know Joey's not intention. I've played Joe obviously 1,000,001 times. I know he's not intentionally, done that. It's a brand new codex, and it wasn't the first port of call to his mind. It's not my. Well, I suppose number one, it's my responsibility. I should, if I'm, the player I am, know all of his rules. I should know all the rules in the game technically, but often that isn't always the case. So let's say it gets to it and I go, right, well, Joe, I said, did you have any weapons that were -3? What do you think Joe's response should be to that? What would you do, Jonesy? Knowing I wanted to cast Psychic Fortress if you were -3.
If he was out of deny range and had the powers to do it, I'd let you try and cast it, if it was me. If the mistake was genuinely on me. But it would depend on the question you ask, because if you ask shooting attacks...
Different question.
I'd say no, they're not shooting attacks, they're combat attacks.
Yes, that was my... Yeah, absolutely. What about you, Jack? How do you feel about that?
I'm all for Joe beating you, to be honest. So I'm with Joe. That's my answer to that one. No, it's a tricky one, because you have no way of knowing if it was an intentional or unintentional. Yeah, obviously with Joe, it obviously is an unintentional one here. But if you put that into a tournament setting, then what do you say in return? Do you think that you've been intentionally cheated at that point? Is it right to ask for that go back to cast Psychic Fortress? It's a strange interaction, and I'm not sure how.
There's so many weapons in the game, isn't there? And there's so many things that alter the weapons as well. Like you might have all -2 weapons, and then a doctrine puts them all into -3. It's like it gets very complicated. This is why I like to read all the books, to have a basic understanding of what everything is.
So this is really important when it comes to those questions. You're right by what I said earlier, Jonesy. You were right when you said about, did you ask whether it was, do you have any shooting weapons that are -3? Because that's different to melee. That's a different question. It's not Joe's responsibility to tell me what his melee AP is if I'm asking for a shooting based question, right? Obviously, Psychic Fortress works in both. I'm asking it in my psychic phase to prepare myself for the next 2 turns. But there's also things like you said there, with that interaction of, you could pay 2 CPs whilst in a certain doctrine, and every time you roll a 6, you get that -3. You should then, I believe, say, by the way, I do have a stratagem that means that I can get to -3. So although my weapon profiles, because I think that's where you can have a real feel bad moment in a gotcha moment. If you've asked your opponent, have you got any way to, I don't know, can that unit advance in charge?
But actually, sorry, just on that AP one, it goes back to the question that you've asked. Because if you say, are any of your weapons AP2, or is there any way of getting your weapons beyond AP2 is a different question, isn't it? Because again, it's
There
drawing
might
that
be
line.
5 different ways to do it.
Exactly. You know, with the Space Marines, you got your Doctrines, Warlord traits, relics, you know, whatever it might be. But then it's that line, isn't it, between answering the question and fairly and giving away your whole.
It's like knowing everything off the top of your head as well. Like if you're Mephrit with Necrons, when you get in half range, everything's +1 AP. So then you're trying to think at the start, like what's 2s going to 3s and 1's going to 2s, and
you know, and some of that stuff could be your trick. You know, you could have built your army around that stratagem, and you get put in an awkward position where you've got to kind of declare your hand at the beginning of the game. I'm not sure. It depends how that question was asked. I think is critical.
There is a difference between how much you should share and how much you shouldn't, and I think it comes down to you whether you feel like you're going to give your opponent a gotcha moment. I don't know. Let's say you said, I've had it before. I said, can that knight move and get line of sight to here, to this unit I had of Dark Reapers at the time? And he was like, no, it's fine, I can't. But he didn't tell me that he could advance and still shoot. So his advance move could get him within that range, but I just said a move. I didn't say explicitly the advance move. Do you see what I mean? So that's where he should have said, in my opinion, by the way, I can advance and shoot, or I can advance and charge with this unit.
Yeah, I definitely, you know, the games that we've played in tournaments and stuff, where it's exactly the same situation when I'm playing Tau. Go, oh, can I move? I think our last Blood Angels game, Steve, that we played, is like, can that Riptide get round this corner to shoot with his move? I was like, no, I'm going to have to use Monka and advance and shoot in this turn to do it. Okay, right. We then look at the new position. If I've rolled a 6 on my advance, and you can adjust it accordingly, because that is a feel bad moment if someone doesn't see that one coming. They think they've hidden from everything, and all of a sudden you just jump out of nowhere and send off a full volley. It does create a real bad feel bad moment.
I think the better question to ask is it for the max threat range of a model.
Yeah.
Because that's how me and Jack play the Plasma Inceptors. We're like the maximum threat range, and we just stay in.
It was such a stupid game.
It was such a stupid game. It's like 0.1 of an inch outside of yours, and then he was 0.1 of an inch outside of mine.
It was a dance of the dance of the Plasma Inceptors.
Yeah, and that way we were factoring in if we roll a 6 on the advance, this is the absolute maximum.
Yeah,
I just kept dancing around.
But I've always been of the opinion I would rather slightly overshare than slightly undershare, just so my opponent doesn't feel like...
Yeah.
And that's where I can be sporting, I can be generous with my information, but not putting myself at a disadvantage either, right?
I played a game at RGT, and it was like 97, 93. I lost it to John, a guy I've played several times. He plays Elder and Harlequins. And I was playing the new AdMech, and he hadn't played them before. And he was like, what do I need to know as a Eldar player about this army? And I know from playing all the Eldar, he needed to know about the horsemen having that they can charge and move. They can move 12 when they're declared as a charge, because that's the whole stratagem against his army. If I didn't tell him that at that point, then it's a very hard game for him to even play.
I mean, that's you being, I think, very, very, very generous, because obviously John's a great lad, and obviously we've all played him and we've all had great games with John. So again, you've got that experience of this is a guy that he will not intentionally cheat, and he's asking me a pretty genuine question. I don't want to have a feel bad moment because I appreciate my friendship with John and I want to have a good game. But you don't have to outlay your game plan to your opponent. But if they ask you a question, then make sure it is answered fully, I would say. And if there
wasn't a game plan. It was before we even deployed. I just said, look, it's a brand new unit. It's only been out 3 weeks.
this can do this.
This is the stratagem that will break the Harlequins if you don't
know about
play near it. And we had a cracking game that ended like 97-93, and if my indirect fire had killed his last character, I actually won the game. It was that close.
Yeah.
But without that, he would have lost a lot of units on the first turn when he come across, because he'd just move away and they'd be sat in front of an AdMech gun line.
Yeah. No, love it. Right, guys, well, I think we'll wrap that up, but I think we've got into some really good discussions, and hopefully you guys have got a bit of an idea of how you should handle these situations. But I'm just going to end on this. If you ever say, technically I can do this, then the answer should probably be you shouldn't do it. Just because you can technically do something doesn't mean you should. And if you ever feel uncomfortable with anything, the best port of call is to go get a TO. Just say, I'm hearing what you're saying, respect your opponent in terms of be polite to them, and just say, I would like a TO's opinion on this, if that's okay with you. And you are well within your rights to do that. And when you do ask the TO, just ask an open-ended question. Don't try and lead them in any way, and no doubt you'll get a much fairer and also just response from the TO and also your opponent. Anything more from you two to add?
No, I'm all good with that.
No, I think for me, a lot of the stuff that we've discussed, I think generally across the game, that sportsmanship and fair play is always increasing and getting better. Since I've been playing for the last 2-3 years now, so it's great to see that lots of improvement in sportsmanship is happening across the board.
No, absolutely.
Yeah, you very rarely get a bad game, to be fair.
Yeah,
very rarely. Most games are really good.
And we're talking a lot about things here which are like the grey areas that come up in friendly games, narrative games. You've probably had a game like this week. And again, we just always want to make sure we are intentionally adhering to the rules at all times and making sure we are fair. So absolutely. And if you haven't played in a tournament, I know obviously we've got COVID restrictions at the moment around the world. But look, as soon as you can get out there, think about attending one, because you'll absolutely love it. And anyway, guys, thanks so much for listening, and we'll see you guys on another episode of the Competitive 40k podcast. Take care.
This podcast is brought to you by the Vanguard Tactics Academy, the only online coaching course for Warhammer 40,000. At the VT Academy, not only do we help you win more games in the right spirit of the game, we'll build confidence and we'll help you get more value and enjoyment from your hobby, and take you through step-by-step guides for everything, from starting your first army to tournament play to advanced tactics. Sign up at vanguardtactics.com.